issue from many angles, and that's why we have a great group of panelists today to kind of address this. And again, I want to thank the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services and J. Jefferson Company for hosting us at this wonderful campus, so thanks for hosting us. We're going to get into this. We're going to have time for questions on the end as well. And then we're going to actually start out on the end there with our good friend of housing, Elmer Moore, CEO of the Wisconsin Housing Economic and Development Authority. And Elmer, if you can, for those of you who may not know you, and we're kind of joking before the panel started that he's Elmer, and you probably know him because he's Elmer. How many Elmers do you know? But Elmer, if you kind of talk about your role and WHEDA's role, and just what are some of the challenges to creating affordable housing?
Good afternoon, everyone. By show of hands, let's just get on the same page. Who knows someone else named Elmer?
Actually, no.
Stop it.
I do know one.
They don't live in Wisconsin.
Well, then they don't exist. Who do you know?
Elmer Menga. He's a U.S. bank. He's a banker at U.S. Bank.
In Wisconsin?
In Wisconsin.
I got a problem.
Yeah, you have one. There's one more.
Yeah, it's like Highlander. There can only be one. So I'm really excited to be here today for a couple of reasons. First, this is my first visit to this site, and it is beautiful. It is just such a wonderful demonstration of what we need literally hundreds of thousands of more of. It's a great example of what can happen when we reimagine something that's in our backyard for 100 years, and we think about what's the highest and best use. And it's just really lovely, so congratulations.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the housing crisis, and more specifically, the affordable housing crisis. The nice thing about this conversation is there's not really disagreement about the severity of the crisis. We all agree that there's a crisis. We have insufficient numbers of housing units, either available for purchase or available for rent, in this day and age, in this market. And worse than that, we have an insufficient number of affordable or accessible units. And when I stipulate accessible, I do mean both units that everyone could get their way into, that are physically accessible, but I also mean available for people at the right time and at the right cost. If there is any disagreement around housing, it's where we need it, it's for whom we need it, and maybe it's what it should look like and how we should get there. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that how piece. It is incredibly expensive to build housing, full stop. It gets even trickier when the production of that housing has to make sense for a developer or an owner who cannot charge as much as they want, or as much as they might want, or as much as the market might bear for those residents. It can only work when the rents available to the community renting will actually justify the expense of production. And right now, money is extremely expensive. I'm sure all of you know that. If you are in the market for a mortgage, you've figured out that these are like 5 percentage points higher than they were just a few years ago. And that impacts developers and owners just as much. Wages have been stagnant for far too long. Both stagnant as a function of the economy, but also structurally stagnant. People just aren't making a lot of money. And then finally, the cost, the actual things that we need to build housing units, the supplies, are outrageously expensive. And that's before we get into the conversation about the tariffs and all the federal actions that are really going to move the cost in the wrong direction. So if you take the supply chain, if you take the cost of capital, if you take the wages that people earn that can justify the expense put into the production of that housing and the financing of that housing, all the things are either massively too low or critically too high. And it's the perfect recipe for a disaster. And that's the environment we're in now. And so I'm going to try to show some discipline. I'm going to stop there.
Very good. We'll come back to you in a little bit. That sounds good. Thank you, Elmer. Now we're going to turn over to Dan Harreth, Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services. Dan, some of you might be thinking affordable housing and your department. Would you let the crowd know a little bit of what your department does and maybe the tie-in between building codes and affordable housing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Don.
It might be easier to tell you about what we don't do as opposed to what we do. You know, we get into everything from amusement ride inspection to professional licensing, and then of course why we're here today, which is our building codes. You know, building codes can be, as Jason well knows, very dynamic, but they're often viewed as prescriptive. And so what we're seeking to do as a part of this conversation is really start to shift the way we look at codes as sort of these either or choices. And can we start designing codes, and can we start looking at opportunities to really not make it an either or discussion. Oftentimes when we talk about cost of building, and we often say, well, we can either build a cheap building or we can build a safe building. And I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive. I think we can start to evaluate, are there smart technologies that we can bring to bear? Have the development of technologies in combination with one another led us to a different place? And let me give you a really good example of that. 50 years ago when we built a building, we may have put, we may have had a requirement for 2 stairwells. And we needed 2 means of egress to make sure we were getting effectively in and out of buildings. But the reality is as property costs have gone up, as the real cost of land has gone up, building 2 stairwells starts to become prohibitively expensive when we talk about the cost of land and how big a plot we can build on. And so in today's day and age, when most multifamily requires full sprinklers throughout the buildings, they have self-closing doors and many other features which lead to a dramatically safer building. And the data is really there on that in terms of a multifamily, a post-2000 multifamily building is safer than any single family building that currently exists in the United States. And so we start to look at how have we added technology over time that keeps us safe, and maybe we can start to revisit some of these legacy technologies and say, is this right in every circumstance? Or can we build a version of this, a smarter version of this, that allows us to actually keep the building just as safe as it is today, but start to scale down the costs of some of these features. And so that's why I'm interested to talk to particularly our developers and our architects who are here with us today to really better understand what are those key developments we can look at and start to rethink the way we think about keeping people safe.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for that, Dan. I can turn over to Jason, just to my left here. Jason is the principal of Quorum Architecture. Maybe Jason, a little bit about what you do, but then from your perspective as an architect dealing with this every day, why should we consider building codes looking at increasing affordable and attainable housing?
So the building code issue, and we've talked about this morning, the building code issue is I'll start with the second half of this question. There's no magic bullet, right? But Dan mentioned it, stair. Okay. So if there are now 3 cities in the US that allow single staircase buildings up to 6 stories in height, as an example. The first one by many decades was New York City. So in one of the most difficult firefighting environments in America, they have been allowing this for decades. And the reason that other cities are now adopting it is, for instance, Pew did a study that basically said the level of danger in these buildings, or for instance, the level of fatalities in these buildings in the fire, identical to buildings with 2 stairs. And that's just because if you're in a multifamily building, the building's not what's burning, it's the contents of the building. So the odds of a fire being into a fire stair are somewhere in between slim and none. And a fire stair in a 6-story building will cost you, what, $250,000. But you didn't amortize that across 30 units, it's X number of thousands of dollars of cost for that, added to the cost of that unit. And then it just becomes one more paper cut in the death by 1,000 paper cuts. So the codes, without compromising safety, and you also use the word prescriptive, using data, using a performance-based approach to building codes, which Wisconsin allows, is a way to help save costs. And then the other sort of parts of the government process, which is outside of what DSPS can control, is what is the municipality making a new developer do to get entitlements, is what we call them, but basically to say, Josh, this was probably an industrially zoned property, and
That's
you
right.
probably had to rezone it. And that takes, depending on where you are, 4 to 12 months and tens of thousands of dollars. And so that becomes a barrier to building affordable housing, is not everyone can go at risk for $100 grand in a year of their life to, to get that entitlement in place. But again, that is basically controlled by the municipalities, but also a barrier that we should be looking at.
Perfect, very good. Let's turn over to a developer's perspective. Josh, thanks again for hosting us today at this wonderful venue. Josh, again, from your perspective, what are some of the barriers? You talked to, there's finance, there's zoning. I mean, what are some of the barriers you're seeing in today as you're doing a lot of new construction, historic renovation?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I mean, a lot of what Elmer hit on earlier, just the cost of production of housing at all, has gone up so much just within the last couple of years. Really even prior to COVID, just the cost of construction was already getting to be prohibitively high. It was very difficult to make numbers work. And that's just building market rate housing. When you then layer in the affordability restrictions, and just to kind of, set expectations a little bit, what do we mean by affordable housing? If we take this project, for example, Arabella Apartments, where we're sitting, these are 60 units of so-called Section 42 tax credit financed housing. This is, rent restricted, right? So most of the units in this building, they cost as much to build as any market rate apartments, but then we enter into these very long-term land use restriction agreements that actually require us or whoever else would own this property to rent out these units to households making incomes at or below 60% area median income, or actually even less than that in some cases. That's the income restriction side of it. Then there's also a rent restriction side, which means that, if I were to take the apartment units in this building and plunk them into the 3rd Ward of Milwaukee, I could probably rent them out for $3,000, $4,000 a month, but they're actually renting for about 20% of that number. So it's a fraction of a fraction of what the market rents would normally be. So when you take the problem of the cost of construction just to begin with for market rate housing, then you put this income restriction and rent restriction on top of it, because the whole goal of this is to create, high quality, affordable rental housing that's accessible to people of modest means. It just really just blows a huge hole in our financial pro forma. It makes it very difficult for us to make these projects work. And the only way we can do it is with the tax credit program and many of the other subsidies that are out there. So a lot of times, we spend time looking at the capital stack and going through the various number of federal, state, local financing programs. And I will say for this project in particular, I think we got a little bit of all of them. There's probably about 12 different sources of funding to make this particular project possible. But anything that we can do to reduce the cost of production is also something that we really got to focus on, because there's only so much, precious resources of federal, state, local dollars that can help support projects like this. So I think it's, probably more important than ever before, just given that coming out of COVID, supply chain crisis, construction costs are up 43% in just the last 2 or 3 years. We see that every day. And I was actually very encouraged about this particular discussion to look into. It's very innovative to start thinking about, well, beyond just cost of construction, what are some things we can do from a regulatory perspective, in terms of building codes throughout the state to try to make that cost of production even just a little bit less.
Perfect. That's a great segue. We talked first what are some challenges, but we're going to kind of turn to what are some opportunities. Maybe we'll kind of start at the front again with Elmer. Elmer, what are you seeing as some of the greatest opportunities today to help move housing production forward? And are there other types of housing we should be considering other than, larger multifamily or single family?
Yeah, so I think this moment is probably the most encouraging thing possible, right? Where we are not just having a conversation about what regulations we can revisit, but we're doing it out loud, which is availing, not just the developers and the architects, but the public we serve, the public the public from whom we ask a great deal of trust. We're asking for your input. I think it's living up to Governor Evers' mandate to connect the dots. It's these two seemingly disparate agencies coming together to say, okay, how do we do this and move the needle? You know, there's other building technology that we're very interested in, whether it's panelized construction or modular, what we refer to as factory-built housing. We've got to come up with a solution that will be safe, will be secure, will be sustainable, but will just have to be more affordable and more quickly produced. We've got a massive, massive gap to fill as it relates to supplying housing to the folks that need it. And if we continue doing things the way that we have for the last 40, 50, 60, 100 years, the problems are only going to get worse.
Perfect. Dan, maybe kind of getting back to building codes and things like single stairwells have been mentioned. Once you identify these potential updates, what is the process? Is it easy? How do we move forward from here?
Well, you know, I don't know that there are any government processes that would be considered easy, but you know, to a certain extent, that's by design, right? I mean, the building code is a government rule writing process, like many others, and currently in the state of Wisconsin, that's a 12 to 18 month process. But I also think that's for in some ways good reason, right? I mean, that involves multiple public hearings, that involves lots of opportunity for both legislators as well as citizens to engage and to make their points and feelings known on a particular topic. And I think, you know, that's all stuff that we have to take into consideration when we're developing policy that we all have to live by. That being said, I think there's lots of interesting opportunities, again, discrete changes where we can sort of be nuanced and focused. A couple of others certainly that have come across my desk, and not all are related to the building codes. I think you've heard a little bit already about zoning. There's some proposals nationally to require municipalities to wherever there's commercial zoning to allow multifamily residential in that commercial zone space. We talk a lot about workforce housing, but what better way to create workforce housing than building it right next to the places where people are shopping and people are working. And we've seen those developments where they do happen that have been wildly successful. Mixed-use housing is one of the fastest growing segments of housing in many cities across the country. And so, the process, I think, is arduous, but Jason made a point earlier about performance-based versus prescriptive. And the building codes already allow for performance-based measures. And so it's really about, instead of telling people how they're going to build something, right, we're saying, here are the standards we want you to meet when you do build something. So then Jason or Jay can bring multiple ideas to the table and start to say, hey, okay, in this space normally we would fire sprinkler the whole space and it would cost these many thousands of dollars, but in this instance we are going to fire sprinkler half, we're going to put higher rated firewalls in the other half, and that's all en route to, right, what we all care about in terms of safety is how fast we can get somebody out of a building that's potentially become unsafe. And so that's just one option, which a lot of developers already have that conversation, but where can we do that in other places?
Perfect. Very good. Thanks a lot for that, Dan. Jason, maybe just kind of piggyback on that. You're working all over the country. I know you're in Boston, you're looking at St. Louis and Washington. What are other kind of code modifications or things you're seeing that maybe we could bring to the discussion here in Wisconsin?
Well, first of all, the affordable housing, I think this was one of your questions. I would say that working in other states compared to working in Wisconsin, they make, and Josh can probably speak to this if you're in Illinois, the application for affordable housing tax credits in a state like Illinois probably costs 5 times what it does here, and another year. So the housing and economic development authorities can streamline. WHEDA has historically been very easy to work with compared to other states.
Don't stretch it now.
Now,
Yeah, here comes the but.
But, those of you that are in the affordable housing world, there's a qualified plan that comes out every 2 years. We're in a new world in Wisconsin. So far, people are just figuring it out, so we think it's okay. But the intent was to save people time and money. But a step got added to the process, and it seems to be okay. So, fingers crossed. See what the end of the month looks like.
We both will.
Elmer's getting ideas in there.
Yeah. So can I just add to that?
I was trying to be as politic as possible.
No, you're doing a great job. You're being complimentary. You know, we have some responsibility in this process, right? So it works against our mission interest if we make the process so onerous, so expensive, so impossible that we're using up the extremely limited resources that you all have to get the job done. So I'm actually really flattered and happy to hear that it's better here than some other places, but I want to acknowledge out loud in front of other people that there's still progress to be made and work to be done, even in Wisconsin.
The bigger trip up for us, and we were discussing this at an event we were all at this morning, where so the process to go after the financing in Wisconsin is better, and this is not a Wisconsin problem, but one of the things that we're challenged with as we design these things is that depending on the funding sources, and this killed a major project of ours this morning, you are held in affordable housing to up to 3 different accessibility standards. So there's the building code, which is obviously non-negotiable. WIDA has supplemental accessibility standards, which are fine. You just have to, but now you're tracking 2 different sets of standards, and they're complementary. What killed us this morning was a project that was going to receive HUD money, or some HUD financing, brings in another set of standards, and it was a standard in renovating an existing building that we're physically unable to meet. So that's actually a challenge for us, to track all 3 and make sure we're not missing. And they're all complementary, but they all have their own nuance. But it limits in acquisition rehab, or whatever you want to call it, repurposing existing buildings. It limits what you can do. And in the case of a project this morning, it eliminated what we could do. So.
Very good. And Josh, again, from a developer's perspective, what would make things easier other than just handing you a pot of gold coins or something like that to get?
We'll take that.
Okay.
That
if it's code or anything, I mean, really, what's it? And there is no silver bullet, we know, but what is in your mind?
Yeah, I really think. So there's a lot of property out there. There's a lot of potential, I think, to recycle buildings in a way that could help meet some of these goals we're talking about of more, whether it's market rate workforce, affordable housing. But when you really start to look at existing structures and how to bring them compliant with a residential code, you have to remember, I mean, a lot of the things we talk about, just to take a word from Jason's world, is design intent, right? These are buildings that were built to be, used from 9 to 5 roughly, not so much even on the nights or weekends, let alone people staying there overnight. They're used as office space, and to take something like that and make it a hotel or residential spaces, it's a gigantic rethinking of the entire way that building works. And the cost killers every time are MEPs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. A lot of fire and life safety is a huge part of that. And this is kind of a tough conversation to have in a sense, because you don't want to necessarily relax those standards, right? You don't want to say, well, let's just make the building a little less safe and then it will cost less money. I mean, I like the terminology that we're using around whether it's smart technologies or things like that we can employ to help, still meet those requirements for safety, but we're doing it in a way that costs less money. But again, back to kind of whether it's historic or existing structures, I mean, Jason just mentioned, using HUD financing on a project where, HUD has its own whole set of standards that you have to meet for housing. And I've been in that exact situation where what HUD says you have to do if it's in an existing structure, it might actually be physically impossible, given the way that the code is written right now. So, are there ways to look at, getting more creative just from whether it's grandfathering, variances, I think anything that we can do to really promote conversion of existing structures right now, especially kind of given again what's going on, across the country with a lot of office buildings that are sitting around underutilized. I think that could be a huge opportunity.
Very good. And with that, we do have a time for a few questions. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. Maybe I'll just throw one up there myself. We talked about, manufactured housing. Does that, I don't know if that's Jason, whoever, I mean, how does that fit in? Are there any code issues with that? Does it fall pretty compliant?
It has to follow the same building codes as everything else, but again, in the no magic bullet spirit, several billionaire-backed companies have tried this in the last 10 years, and they've all failed. So it hasn't been figured out yet, and I think the important word there is yet. It's getting closer every day, but I don't know. And we'll see it on the coast first. Some demonstration projects have been built in New York that are modular. You can run into other problems delivering that kind of housing because, for instance, in New York, they didn't like it with the trade unions, and they will ruin your whole day. So, but it's coming. So,
I would take issue with it absolutely happening on the coast first. I want to believe that we have we're going to give some strong competition, and it's conversations with DSPS and organizations like LEDA. When a government or even a quasi-government entity does something first, it actually can literally clear the way for private actors. We can have a proof of concept. It's things like the conversations Dan and I have had about, when something is, I'm going to use the wrong words just to make the point, when something is manufactured housing versus a mobile home. And those words lead your brain to have a very different picture and a very different sense of the safety, the quality of the environment. And maybe the difference is whether one's bolted to the ground and another is bolted to wheels. Well, how hard is it to take off wheels and bolt it to the ground? Not hard, but is that sufficient to turn one into the other? As of right now, no. But possibly, and I don't know anything, but maybe it should be. And so the way we get there is by having conversations and trying to be really innovative, always powered by the need to make life better for people in Wisconsin. This is an instance where truly fulfilling a need is going to bring down more barriers than what the market can do.
can I follow up on that, or add to it? It's incredibly true. You said once someone has done it, the second time, we did a process on a project in Milwaukee, which was a pretty big ask of the city and the state for some code variances. The process took 26 months, and it was a positive process. We just did the same process in St. Louis, and it was 8 months, because now they've seen it done. We are doing it right now in Austin, it's 4 months. And so every time we do it, we say, point to what's been done and approved by a tier 1 city in Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin. That's powerful. So once someone does it once, and there have been authorities that have been asked to allow this sort of thing. In this case, it was tall timber. There were authorities that said, absolutely not, until the new code was issued in other parts of the country, and somebody, through a data-based process, said, this is okay. So if someone in, I think it was Texas, said absolutely not, when the new code was adopted, in a different state, somebody figured this out, and then they were open to a conversation.
Okay.
tall timber, mass timber relates to affordable housing, or how it would?
So the first two, the first mass timber affordable housing development, it's a workforce development, it's immediately east of downtown Seattle, is open. It's been wildly successful. It's called Heartwood, if anyone wants to look it up. The architect is a friend of ours. We're consulting on one in Boston, and again, it's happening on the coast, and the reason that it's happening on the coast is out there. Everything is so expensive. Our contractors in Boston basically said, because they priced it as a steel building, and they priced it as a mass timber building, which is a superior system, they basically came back and said, it doesn't matter. So, but they can be built quickly. They can be built on very constricted job sites, which is important in urban infill, which goes back to the single staircase. That's what it's good for, really tight sites where every inch matters. So it's a better way to build, and that's where the codes are really jumping towards right now. And once we, as the supply ramps up, the cost premium will go down. So hopefully it becomes much more widespread.
Yeah, so thank you everyone. I think it's important to talk a little bit about energy burden when we're talking about affordability in Wisconsin, because that's a huge issue in this state. And you know, the residential energy code in Wisconsin is pretty old. It could use an update, and I'm wondering how to balance the needs of residents when paying utility bills with the need to pencil out affordable housing projects. And if you could comment on what you think about what should happen with an energy code update and how that would affect the price of building affordable housing in Wisconsin.
I can speak to that a little bit, especially with projects that have housing tax credits in their capital stack. You will always exceed and you're absolutely right, the Wisconsin Energy Code is embarrassingly outdated. But because of the standards that the authorities place on their competitive processes, any developer that didn't reach the maximum standard of sustainability that's written into that document, you lose. So affordable housing is already, by the nature of its financing, going to be built in a more sustainable way. And I think, for instance, this year, WIDA has brought in a few more standards than even they used to have. Part of the challenge of that is, Josh touched on it, a third of your building is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection. That's a third of the cost of your building, sometimes more. As you make them better, your upfront costs go up. And I don't think there's a great way for a developer to recoup those upfront costs. So again, it's one more paper cut. So.
I was just going to speak to the building codes a little bit. So on the multifamily and commercial side, the governor has proposed an updated building code. We proposed it, I think, a couple of 2-3 years ago now. It's currently the subject of a state lawsuit. And so hopefully we have resolution on that soon, but because I think one of the things that we've certainly heard from our contracting and our development community is that the farther codes get out of date, the more difficult it actually becomes to build, because the universe of materials and technologies and tools that people are using to build these start to become misaligned with the building code. So we're very much looking forward to that update. And then on the residential, the single family and two family side, we've recently started that code update process, and we're looking forward to getting going on that in earnest this year.
Could I ask a quick follow-up to that? I'm just wondering if any of y'all think that a building code update would help align some of those standards that are hard to meet, because HUD and WIDA and the building codes might have different accessibility standards. Do you think updating the building codes would provide an opportunity to align those and make it easier for developers and builders?
Certainly wouldn't hurt. I don't know that it's a perfect answer. So just so that we're all speaking the same language, if you were to read the QAP, which is our document, it's an application rubric It's also a policy document. We've been slowly ticking up what we expect for sustainability, sort of in efficiency. The challenge is the developer, as an operator of multifamily housing, might not actually be on the hook or on the beneficiary side of those efficiencies. And so the developers taking on the cost in this inflationary environment where everything's expensive, plus money is expensive, to create a building where they're not going to get more income out of it. It's even when a developer is extremely well intended, it's really hard to make it pencil out. And so we're trying to find that right spot of not, frankly, asking the impossible. You know, would AWIDA love to see energy production on the roofs of all new buildings? Absolutely. However, we'd like to see new buildings. And particularly in this federal environment when some of those resources are being clawed back or being eliminated, it's just increasingly more difficult.
I have a question for Rita. So I know at one point Rita, for a long time, has sort of supported the going into the AMI of 100% to possibly 120. And the reason I say that is because I think for a while we've been on this journey of doing workforce housing because it's been an attractive word, language, or narrative that's been used. But when you look at the technical side of it, I think the complexity is that when you reach beyond 80% CMI, you now have to go to other institutions to sort of subdivide or put all these capital stacks together. Does WIDA have a desire to sort of be cultivating in a creative space of some of these funding mechanisms of gap fillings? Because in order for us to do a true affordable housing, a lot of times it's who you're getting your capital from. And so if you all have the understanding of what it takes and the wherewithal, are there going to be any changes on that side of the spectrum so we can
I don't think I brought the crystal ball with me. But
That's a great question.
yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'm going to translate it just in case y'all don't all do what we do. WIDA is the state of Wisconsin's housing finance agency, and we offer mortgages for people buying homes who are income qualified, which means that they are less than 140% of the county median income, which means they have a good job, but not an amazing job, okay? We also are a financer, so folks like Josh and Ariam might come to us to finance the development of the buildings that they're building. And we are the tax credit allocator. Tax credits are this finite resource that take up a bunch of space. They create equity. So in this development, Josh won roughly $1 million tax credit award, which generated roughly $8,700,000 in equity. That's $8,700,000 that he didn't have to borrow, which would have obviously impacted the business of operating this place. Our tax credit program, we have a state program and we have federal tax credits as well. They require that the development meets certain income requirements, and it's capped at 80% AMI. So we can't tax credit multifamily units that with 100% or 120% AMI. Those folks are considered making too much money. You could do something cool where you mix market rate and affordable into one building. It's very difficult because we can only use our resources on the affordable side. And can you tell me which brick that's supporting, okay? So what we need to do is identify some other instruments outside of tax credits in our financing product. At this very moment in time, we do not have a loan product that can stand alone without a tax credit component. We are working on it. That we're not necessarily just trying to solve that problem, but we understand that we don't have enough tax credits to get the job done. So we're gonna have to find some financing products that are gonna hopefully address some of that and some other issues related to just getting some more housing units built.
And to add to that, I think a lot of it is workforce housing, and I mean affordable as a whole is
sort of restricting the idea of like you have to go tax credit just to do affordable. So if there are creative mechanisms that are getting put into the play, I think it's just a matter of finding those institutions that sort of can jump on the bandwagon. But when you hear words like impact investments and things of that sort, it's starting to become more words, and there are actually instruments that can actually do what it needs to do. Because we do have a shortage of working poor families who meet the requirements, meet, the housing stability component of it, but because they they may get an income raise of $500,
Yeah.
now they're sort of out of a housing component. So I think that's sort of what we're trying to address here, is how do we build affordable housing, workforce housing, without all of the regulatory to do right and keep people in that.
Amen, could not agree more. So we play on our end, where we're trying to make the cost of capital lower, we're trying to come up with ways to sort of fill up some of the space in the cap stack, and then we have to participate in conversations where we say, okay, literally, Dan, how can we make this a little easier for developers? And, I like to joke about developers not being my favorite people, but they're doing incredible work.
For a place of love.
Yeah, absolutely. In an incredibly complex environment. And I think the example that we frequently use, code-related, is this stairwells thing, right? I'm trying to make money more valuable, and I'm asking partners like Dan and DSPS and all the folks that can impact it to make the finish line closer. So we are eventually, God willing, going to meet somewhere in the middle where units are cheaper to produce and our money is more valuable, and we just get exponentially greater productivity.
Perfect. I think we're about time. Really appreciate it. I think this forum, I appreciate everyone on the panel. Round of applause for the panel, first of all. There will be more, keep the ideas coming, because we have great leaders in the state that want to get housing done. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.